Hey, it's Ellie from The Curious Geographer, and in this video we're going to be talking about why your 20 markers at A-Level Geography should look like this triple burger. If you are new to my channel, do not forget to hit subscribe and also get a reminder for live interviews which are coming up, which are really good for case study knowledge and exam tips as well. So, upcoming in this video, how you should structure your exam questions like this, how you write paragraphs using piece, I prefer, not peel, as like I used to teach and many people are taught, why you should have a SASSY conclusion, and also how you can use language that's going to stand out for the examiners to see. So this is mainly for like AQA, however, I've also taught Edexcel and it's really, really similar. So you can kind of use these skills for any longer mark exam questions. These aren't purely my ideas, so I have kind of borrowed from different people I've heard and good techniques that I've heard. So some of them you might have heard before. I just thought this is something which my students have found really useful all in one place. So let's get into how to write these 20 mark exam questions with some examples as we go along. The first thing is to check the command word. So for A-Level Geography, there's normally quite similar command words. You're going to either get an evaluate question, an assess question, or a to what extent. So to what extent do you agree with this? So if it's an evaluate question, and they kind of have to do kind of similar things, they're slightly different, but the key components of answering the exam questions are the same. So for an evaluate question, you need to consider several options or ideas or arguments and come to a conclusion about their importance, success or worth. An assess question, you have to look at several different options or arguments, and I think the main thing with assess is that you need to weigh them up, and then again you come to a conclusion about their effectiveness or how valid they are. And to what extent question is really your opinion, so you need to form and express a view or to merit how valid a view or statement is. So it says to what extent do you agree with this, after examining the evidence and looking at the different sides. So if we have a look at some examples of kind of A-level questions, so these are some that I've made up, but the first one actually is from a really good resource, which is Hodder Geography Review, and they really actually break down exam questions, so I'd say they're really, really good. So for example, the first one, evaluate the extent. It's kind of similar, so you've got evaluate and to what extent. Today's increasing demand for energy is the most important factor in modifying the global carbon cycle. So these are all 20 mark questions. For Edexcel, there's slightly longer questions and there's 18 mark ones, but the key components for the exam questions are really, really similar. So when you're thinking about, for example, evaluate, we're going to look at this one in a second, there are different things that you may want to consider. So this says to what extent in which increasing demand for energy is the most important factor. So the kind of key words you're looking at is it important? Are there any other factors that modify the carbon cycle? So we're going to be looking at how you work this out in a second. Assess the role of trade agreements in contributing to a globalised world. Again, with these, they might not tell you everything there is in the exam question, so you may want to think about, is there anything else which I want to include? So for example, assess the role of trade agreements in contributing to a globalised world. A few things we should always think about anyway, globalised. You should always think about social, economic, political and cultural globalisation. But trade agreements, it says here, assess the role of trade agreements. So what is the role of trade agreements? And is there anything else? It could be technology that also contributes to the globalised world. And then lived experiences to place can only be fully understood through use of qualitative research. To what extent do you agree with this? So this one here, you need to make a decision, like do you agree or disagree? So I think once you've worked out the command word and you're looking at how to answer it, you want to think about how will you assess or evaluate. So this is what I was saying was taken from the Geography Review article for the first question. So the demand for energy part is what is the most important factor. So for example, if you hung all these up on a washing line, would land use be most important, farming, deforestation? And this can help you structure it as well. So you need to think about, is it most important? Is there something else which is more important as well? And you want to be using this language when you're answering them. Other ways you can think about this is what's most significant, or do you 100% agree? Do you disagree? So the bottom question here, to what extent do you agree with this? You could strongly agree with it, or you could disagree with it. And then this is a really useful thing that all of these things have been taken from people who have made fantastic resources. So they're all just in one place, hopefully to help you. So this is an extentometer, it depends how you say it. So I really think it's useful. So when you're thinking about your exam question, it's really good at the beginning. You just don't want to sit on the fence. So I didn't like the word totally, but do you strongly agree, or do you only slightly agree, or do you disagree? Is it extremely important, very important, quite important, only important to a minor extent? And what's the impact? Huge, significant, moderate, partial, or no extent? So those are quite useful when thinking about how you're going to make a judgment. And I'd say that you get marks for evaluative writing, which we're going to talk about, but you just want to make sure you are not sitting on the fence. And part of that A-level geography skill is weighing up these different opinions. And that's what the evaluate, the assess, and to what extent questions do. So it's really important to look at the exam questions, work out if there's anything that's missing, if there's anything that you want to do to add to it that it's not telling you about. So if we go on to the next part, the assessment objectives. So hopefully you would have been told some of these from your teachers. It's really important, I think, to just break it down into AO1 and AO2. So you might have seen this exam criteria here, and there's so much information. Obviously, you are aiming for level 4, no matter what grade you want to achieve. Like, you should be always aiming to get the best answers. So in level 4, you have like a detailed evaluative conclusion and all these kind of things. But this, when you're in exam, you are not going to remember all of this, which is why I say it's really important just to remember the key parts, which is AO1, your knowledge, kind of description explaining, and AO2 is your application. So if we have a look at these in a bit more detail. So your AO1, this is factual points, and it might outline features of a place, object, idea, theory, recall why these have arisen because of particular factors or processes, actions or management objectives, and make use of case study material to support your answer. So the key thing with AO1, this is your knowledge and your case study and your understanding of it. So your basic, can you recall facts and do you understand it? It's a bit different from GCSE if you learn AO1, AO2, AO3, because AO1 was more knowledge, AO2 was understanding, and AO3 was evaluation. Whereas here you just have AO1 and AO2. So if AO1 is your knowledge and understanding, then AO2 is your application. So this is how do you apply that knowledge that you have to the situation, to the exam question. So are you actually answering the exam question? So you want to critically reflect on the limitations, this is part of being evaluative, looking at different viewpoints, perspective, or conflicts regarding an issue. Discuss spatial and temporal variation. So I'm going to talk about scale and spatial temporal because this is really important. Examine relative success or failure. Use important geographical concepts such as scale or established connections and relationships between ideas. So when we're thinking about geographical concepts, hopefully you have seen some of these. So you have causality, systems, equilibrium, feedback, inequality, representation, identity, globalization, interdependence, mitigation, adaptation, sustainability, risk and resilience, and thresholds. I should do like a little test on who can say those the quickest. So this basically, these are the kind of key concepts that underpin A-level geography. And so they are woven throughout your specs in many different ways, and they interlink. So some of the synoptic links between human and physical are within these words as well. So you basically want to have a really good understanding of these, and these help you to gain higher marks on this. So as I said, we're aiming for those level 4 answers. So for a level 4 answer, you need a balance of AO1 and AO2. So some of you might have seen something like this, which is like the mark scheme split up in a bit more understandable way, and some teachers kind of use this to mark works. And it's absolutely great if your teacher is giving you particular marks for knowledge and then application. Application also, I'll talk about, you have to include a conclusion, and you might have individual marks for this. But as I said, for the exam, you might not remember every single part of it. So if you just remember, you need your knowledge, and I'll tell you how to write your exam paragraphs in a second, and then you apply it, thinking about scales really. So if you kind of follow this guide and follow this bookmark, which I've made, it should encompass everything. But mainly just remember AO1, AO2, because when the examiners are marking your exam, what they do is they give a stamp basically for AO1 and AO2. So for a level 4 answer, you need to have a balance of AO1, which means detailed, relevant knowledge with full understanding, so have you explained it, and you need AO2 with detailed, relevant analysis with an evaluative conclusion. And the conclusion is so important. Do not miss that out. That is really what distinguishes between the A's, well, B's to like A's and A stars. Like if you have an evaluative conclusion, like a really, really good one, I'm going to tell you a bit of how you can do that, then your essay will really stand out to be an A star essay. So how do we actually write it? So you want to demonstrate, as I said, AO1 and AO2 in your paragraph. You want to have 3 or 4 clear paragraphs, and this is where the burger acronym kind of comes in. So if you're looking at a burger with your kind of meaty layers or vegan layers, each paragraph will be a piece paragraph, not peel, I prefer piece. And then your evaluative writing, your AO2, is the cheese kind of running throughout your burger. And then you have, and you might want to conclude introduction. You don't have to have an introduction for AQA, but it's quite good sometimes for setting the scene or saying your argument. But you need a really evaluative, juicy conclusion. And then the kind of like the extras on the burger can either be your up-to-date case study, or it can be that really like juicy conclusion, which we're going to talk about in a second. So what exactly does piece mean, and how's it going to help you show AO1 and AO2? So if we have a look at the piece structure, and then I'm going to write an exam question so you can try and so you can see it as well. So piece, like peel, if you use that, P is your point, so you make your point to answer the question and you use the keywords to the question. So to show the examiner that you are answering the question, it's really useful to use part of the question to do that. So you just reword the question. The biggest mistake also when people veer off is when they don't actually answer the question. They just kind of go off, and then you basically get limited at half marks because you don't really get past level 2 if you're thinking about the levels for it. E is your example, or you could say evidence. So you want to show your AO1 knowledge. So we're using recent examples and case studies. So you say, for example, as a question at sentence starter. Application. So this is where you start to use your AO2. So how does this actually answer your question? So apply your AO1, which is your knowledge, with AO2. So remember to consider the significance when using evaluative writing. So the first P and E, that's your AO1, knowledge and understanding, and then the A, your application, how are you answering the question? Then what you do, and this is how you see for cheese for critique, is your evaluative writing throughout. Can you critique this? Now this is actually the hardest thing to do for A-level geography, is having this ongoing evaluation, but I think it's what makes the most sophisticated essays. So this gives you further AO2 marks and can show sophistication and in continuous ongoing evaluation. So what you've just said there may not be relevant for everywhere in the world. So for example, if you're looking at the benefits of, I'm literally just randomly picking out something out of my head, the benefits of globalization, and that people have increased access to technology, and this can connect people around the world, and it leads to social globalization. A critique would be, does that actually occur for everybody? Is there different inequalities? Do some people not have access to the internet? So everything can be critiqued. It might happen at a different scale. It might happen at different levels of development. So starting to think about that critique. And then the evaluation is linking back to the question. So when you're evaluating your writing, how does that link back? So piece, paragraph. So let's have a go at kind of writing one together. So if we have a look at an example using a piece paragraph, so I've actually drawn some lines here, so it can hopefully be nice and neat. If we're looking at assess the role of trade agreements in contributing to a globalized world. This exam question, 20 mark, I might want to have one question on trade agreements such as trade blocks, because I'll be like, yes, I've learnt them really well. I know about the EU, NAFTA. I might want to have trade agreements with far-reaching countries. So for example, UK and Japan. I might even talk about maybe Brexit with the UK. I'm not sure. Yeah, I haven't actually planned this in full. I'm just going to show you a paragraph. But then I also might want to talk about other factors which have also contributed to globalization. I might want to talk about technology. I think that's really interesting. So my first sentence is really, really simple. I've just reworded the exam question, making it a point, linking to what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about trade agreements in this paragraph. So this is my first point here. I then also have already also used the word significant, so I'm starting to use evaluative writing. And next I'm going to go on to my evidence. And I would say that this is what I get my students to do at the beginning, if they have me is actually writing out piece as they go through it, because they find it really useful, particularly because they use the critique part. So trade agreements formed through trade blocs are significant contributors to globalization. So now I'm next going to talk about NAFTA. NAFTA is actually USMCA now. I'm not going to go into that, but I'm going to put NAFTA brackets. Now USMCA has played an important role for the USA, Mexico, Canada, as NAFTA has enabled them to form a free trade area. Now then so I'm going to write that first. So and then I need to think about why does that mean it's successful. So this means that countries are integrated. So remember, globalization is about connecting people and places. So the successful integration has increased investment and cooperation, leading to economies of scale as trade barriers are removed. So remember, free trade area, trade barriers are removed, so imports and exports can increase, and then GDP has increased. And actually between 1993 and 2007, trading tripled between the three countries. So this successful integration, hopefully you can read my handwriting, has increased investment, cooperation, leading to, which in turn contributes growth. So this is all my evidence, and if we have a look back through it, you don't need to put loads of evidence for exam questions. You just need to know, they just need to know what you're talking about. So if we're having a look at the evidence that we've got here, we've already referring to NAFTA. We know that it's the USA, Mexico and Canada. We've actually using lots of key terms such as integration, cooperation leading to economies of scales, and then I've got a fact here that it's trade tripling. Now that is plenty of information. You don't need any more evidence than that at all. But then what we need to do is we need to do our application. So why does that actually mean that it is leading to globalization? So this shows that trade agreements contribute to economic globalization as there are increased flows of good and capital. Remember, globalization is about flows of goods and capital. So this and people. So there's lots of different aspects of globalization, and this is what you should always consider if you're doing a question on globalizations. This economic globalization as there are increased flows of goods and capital. Now, that is a really strong paragraph for the moment. But you need to, and the ongoing evaluations, the cheese that is going through it is your critique. So as best you can, try and critique it. So it's interesting because NAFTA is formed by countries of varying wealth, it can be argued that when some of the manufacturing has been moved to Mexico for cheap labour, this has led to exploitation. And it's called macrodoreas, is what the factories are called. And that might not happen as much if trade blocs are always formed of countries which are on like kind of same economic kind of level. So that's quite a good critique. If you're talking about the EU, you could talk about how Brexit is occurring. So this shows that countries aren't fully integrated. So many different critiques that you can have. So let's put, however, as NAFTA is formed of countries of varying wealth, it can be argued that some movement of manufacturing into Mexico for cheap labour, I'm going to run out of space, which is called McDoria's, led to exploitation, has increased exploitation. And then you want to, therefore, you return back to the question with your evaluative writing. So, therefore, overall, the trade agreements contribute to globalisation. Therefore, whilst trade agreements may encourage globalisation at national level or international level between countries, it does not encourage globalisation at that local level. So the local people working in the manufacturing area, if they're being exploited, are they also benefiting from globalisation or a part of the globalised world? Okay, so that is an example of how you can write an essay question. Your E at the end, you've gone back to the exam question to answer it. You've applied it through your application. So in the middle, you should be linking to your exam questions again to get the highlighter out, so we can have a look at this. So we've linked back to trade agreements here. We're talking about economic globalization. That means we've got a really good understanding of globalization. We've done a critique. So we've kind of got, even I can't read this, exploitation with Mexico. And therefore, we've got our evaluation again. So that is an example of how you can write a paragraph linking a piece paragraph, and hopefully that's helped you understand it, actually writing an example down there. If we go on to next, then finally what we want to have is we want to make sure we have a SASSY conclusion. So this is what I love. I saw this, I think, on like a teacher's website somewhere, and I thought it was amazing. And then also you want to make sure you're answering the question. So what is a SASSY conclusion? And we're going to have a go at looking at things you can include. So a SASSY conclusion includes a summary of what you found. So I'd always start your conclusion with to conclude. You want to tell the examiners you know exactly what you're talking about. Then you want your analysis. So this depends on what you've been writing for evaluative writing. So what is the most significant factor? This is kind of also your application back to the exam question as well. How far do you agree or disagree? Now, if you remember one S from SASSY, I always say this is the most important S to remember. So you want to think about scale. And if you can write an explicit reference to scale in your conclusion, then really, trust me, it's so good. This can also be used as evaluative writing throughout as well. But you really want to think about long-term, short-term. Is there differences in levels of development? That's part of the evaluation we looked at last time. Will it change? How will it change in the future? Is there an issue of importance for different factors at the local, national, international scale? And then also synoptic. So examiners are looking for you to make links. It might be those key concepts. This kind of depends on the exam question. And then finally, your thoughts. So back to answering the exam question. So if we're looking at the paragraph, I'm not going to write a new paragraph because it's going to take me ages. So summary. So if you're saying what we're looking at, assess the role of trade agreements in contributing to a globalised world. So it's clear, your conclusion, that both trade blocs and free trade agreements, if you talked about that, like the UK and Japan, are significant contributors to a globalised world, especially through the movement of goods and capitals. So you're showing that you have a good understanding of globalisation there because you're also talking about the flow of goods and capital. And if your analysis here, this is part of the critique we've looked at. However, it is clear that trade agreements do not all benefit all countries equally. Additionally, while some trade blocs might allow for migration, contributing to social globalizations, others may not. So this kind of depends on what you've said. Never put anything new in the conclusion. Just pull out what you've written from before. And then if you're thinking about the scale, which is the most kind of important thing here, are there short-term or long-term aspects of it? So some trade blocs are ending. So as I said, like you could refer to Brexit here. Some trade blocs are no longer geographically close. If we're thinking about our scale, so in the long term, will it change? There might be inequalities linking to different levels of development. So development, as we might have mentioned as well. How is it going to change in the future? So this actually kind of links to as trade agreements are happening with countries which are further away, actually maybe regionally trade blocks might not be as important anymore. Does it also occur at different kind of scales? And this is what we talked about, that kind of the local and the national. So you might say that actually for local people connecting, technology might be more important. So you want to really think about these, and this takes practice. So for example, you might say, therefore, when considering the factors driving globalization, they might occur at different and local, national and local scales. So whilst trade agreements might be most important for countries to connect, if individuals are connecting in a globalized world, maybe technology is more important. Does it encourage? It encourages economic and political globalization. Does it encourage social and cultural globalization? So you're kind of linked to that, your thoughts. So answering the questions, I think I mentioned what synoptic was before. To help you kind of even further, this is kind of the writing you should be using. So you need to be using geographical categories and evaluative writing throughout. So I showed you that we looked at evaluative writing, and these are kind of the words that you can be using. So if we have a look at the question from before, so I'm just going to pick up on this one. I'm going to go back to it. It's still got kind of all the highlighting on it. But if we just quickly have a look using a different colour for the evaluative writing, if I was an examiner, I'm just looking at this, let's just do this in blue. I really want to be looking for that evaluative writing. So, and the different like categories as well, to see if they really are speaking like a geographer. So I would already see that the student has already used the word significant. They're using the word like it is important. Looking at through this leads to, they're kind of explaining it. They've used the word, want to increase, however. You might want to use the words on the other hand, therefore. So you can see how you're starting to use evaluative writing to kind of structure your exam question. And then we've got a different scale here as well. So these are the kind of words that you want. So this is kind of what you can come back to if you're looking and beginning to use language, and you will become more and more confident on this when you look at it. And remember always social, economic, environmental and political, global and local, and short term and long term. So hopefully that is helpful. So those are 2 bookmarks that you can use. I've kind of talked through them in detail and given you an example. Let me know how you find and get on, and if you want me to break down any questions in particular, then we can always do that. Yeah, so hopefully that's been really useful. Hopefully that was useful. This is a taste test. Also, this is the most unimpressive burger I've ever seen in my life. I was going to order the triple cheeseburger. I was like, it's going to be huge. It's going to help me explain it really well. And yeah, this is so... I don't know when the last time I had a McDonald's was. I literally do not know. I'm normally a vegetarian. Oh, I can't eat it. Oh,